And today, we're taking a deep dive into a concept, well, it's been making the rounds lately, Duality Syndrome. It's from an episode of the Outkast podcast. It's called, you guessed it, the Duality Syndrome.
Makes sense, right.
Yeah.
So what's fascinating is it digs into this sort of hidden dynamic. Could there be something that mimics, like mirrors the energy of people who are, all about empathy and positivity?
It's not just about those one-off interactions that feel off. It's something potentially way bigger, something connected to a belief that's like shared.
Yeah, I get you. So our mission here in this deep dive is to really unpack this whole duality syndrome thing, how the Outkast podcast talked about it. What is this mimicking entity? How does it work? And what does it all mean for us, as we're out there experiencing life, navigating relationships?
Okay, so let's get into it. At its core, duality syndrome, as they describe it, it's about this entity, or maybe it's like an energetic influence, but it's got this very specific way of operating.
Okay, I'm listening.
It seems to imitate the energy of people who are really cultivating empathy, focusing on their good qualities.
You know what really stood out to me? The podcast emphasized that this isn't just some random person acting this way.
Right.
It's linked to this bigger thing, collective belief or being.
Right.
So it's like, whoa, there's something bigger at play, a shared energetic pattern maybe.
Exactly. It's not just about individual psychology. Maybe it's a shared energy field, a collective consciousness. And they say this entity, it operates with specific beliefs and behaviors.
Okay, so tell me more about these beliefs, because that's where it gets interesting.
So they say this entity pretends to love you, pretends to reflect your characteristics, even thinks it has this pure potential, and claims to be supportive.
Oh, wow. So it's like a distorted mirror, It
Right.
reflects back what you want to see, what you're putting out there. Have you ever been in a situation where someone mirrored you so well it felt off?
The thing is, the podcast, it highlights the motivation behind these actions. It's not about connection.
I saw.
They say this entity ignites deep inferiority complexes in whoever it targets.
Ooh, that's heavy.
Yeah. So it's manipulative. The imitation isn't genuine and wants to mess with your self-worth. Think about it. Have you ever felt good about something only for someone to echo your enthusiasm and then suddenly you're doubting yourself?
Oh, yeah. I can see that. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting, right? Because this leads into what they call egregoric character assassination. This collective entity, according to them, goes after people with zero boundaries.
Right.
Tries to ruin their reputation, even wishes them harm. Pray for your downfall, they say.
It's wild, but when you think about the entity's own, perceived lack, its insecurities, its behavior starts to make sense.
Like in a twisted way.
In a twisted way. If your good vibes highlight its own shortcomings, it doesn't want to learn or grow. It lashes out, tries to dim your light. It's a shattered resenting the sun, right?
That's a great analogy. And the podcast even says the more this happens, the more your light shines. It's like trying to put you down just amplifies your good qualities. But then, classic entity move, it spreads propaganda against you, tries to sabotage your joy. It's never ending.
It is. Have you ever experienced that? The more someone criticizes you, the more determined you get. But then the negativity just keeps coming.
Oh, yeah. It's like a cycle you can't break.
And that brings us to another key point. The podcast calls this entity obsessed with you. Nothing can satisfy it. It's always needing, wanting.
Like it's feeding off of something it can't generate on its own. Almost parasitic.
Exactly. Now, the podcast makes a distinction. They contrast this duality syndrome entity with what they call the original creative force. And this is super important for understanding their whole perspective.
Okay, I'm all ears. Break it down for me.
So the original creative force, they say it's a partnership. Order and chaos working together.
Interesting.
But, and this is a big but, they're not talking about chaos as in like negativity, bad stuff, theft of energy.
So what kind of chaos are they talking about?
They describe it as, get this, a dawn in which light can be shown into places where light was never expected to happen. It's like breaking down old rigid stuff to make room for new possibilities, growth. It's not about pointless conflict or stealing energy. They're very clear about that.
Okay, I see.
These negative actions, they're not true chaos. They're ordered in a structure to adhere to a narrative, as they put it.
That's deep. Does that resonate with you, the idea of things needing a good shakeup to create something new?
Totally. So the takeaway here is that these manipulative behaviors, they're not part of natural evolution. They're an attempt to control, to take energy, maybe even disguised as necessary drama.
Okay, I'm with you. So what's their take on true chaos then?
They say it's a frequency of being misunderstood and misaligned. Different actors, Criftarians or dualists, they play their roles. It's a fundamental part of the cycle. Order, renewal, even growth coming from tough times.
So it's like, even though it's messy, ultimately it's a good thing. It allows for something new to emerge.
Right. This duality syndrome entity,
Anti-creational.
yeah, it works against the natural flow of things. It wants to keep things stuck for its own gain.
Wow, that's pretty intense.
And to really hammer it home, they say that chaos must be made obvious for those who crave order to invest in. Think about that. It's like the threat of chaos is used to make people want order.
So if people are afraid of chaos, they'll buy into whatever system promises order, right? No matter what that system might be.
It's about control.
And to illustrate this, they talk about the one and only thundergod Yahweh or Zeus or Odin as an egregore. An egregore in elements that believe in order. No, just so you know, an egregore is like a shared energy, a mental, emotional energy built up by people who believe in the same thing. Could be a god, a country, even a set of values.
Right, it's like a thought form.
Yeah.
So these powerful figures, the beliefs surrounding them, they become these massive energies that influence whole communities, societies.
Like, it's not just individual belief anymore, it's something bigger.
And it can lead to hierarchies, appointed elders, they say. So this encourages us to really think critically about the stories we hear, the beliefs they're based on. Who are the storytellers? What are their motivations? What do they gain from pushing a certain version of order and chaos?
That's a great point. And speaking of shifts, they go on to say we're at the end of the wounded warrior age.
What do you think that means?
I don't know. It's kind of cryptic, right?
It is. But they seem to be saying that there's this growing awareness. People are waking up to these counterfeit agencies, these manipulative entities or dynamics, whatever you want to call them.
You mean like this duality syndrome thing we've been talking about?
Exactly. And for us, this means we might be moving away from this idea that suffering is the only way to grow. The whole wounded warrior archetype.
You think people are getting tired of the struggle?
Maybe. Maybe there's a shift toward healing, finding strength without constant hardship.
I like that. Then they drop this metaphor. It's time to smother the eagle from Zeus in its own robes. What do you make of that?
Whoa, that's a powerful image. It's like a call to action.
A call to what?
To dismantle, overcome these controlling forces, these egregores of order that have become, too much.
Too controlling.
Yeah, or even harmful. And the robes, maybe that points to a weakness, a vulnerability within these systems.
Like using the system's own power against it.
Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then they talk about root work being done to keep people passive. That's something to watch out for.
It sounds a bit sinister, doesn't it? What's that all about?
They suggest there are these deep-seated influences. They call it the Ancient of Days. And it works to keep people, stuck.
Scared people praying to the god or to the devil, they say.
Right. It highlights how fear-based beliefs can keep people from acting, from changing things. Think about how often we're manipulated with fear.
Oh yeah, all the time. And then there are the conjurers, as they call them.
These are people who try to control both good and evil. But it's not for self-mastery or to help others. It's for their own gain.
So it's power for the sake of power.
Exactly. And the podcast says that this pursuit of power, it traps them in their own rigid beliefs. They become locked into an old, dead tree of life, a tree of death.
They're stuck then.
Totally stuck. They're clinging to a material understanding of existence. No real spiritual growth, no genuine connection.
So let's recap. The Outkast podcast's take on this duality syndrome. We're talking about a hidden influence. It mimics you, feeds off of good energy, and it's tied to collective beliefs.
Right. And they say it makes you feel insecure, undermines you with subtle manipulation, even tries to mess with your reputation.
And it's not real chaos, the kind that leads to growth and renewal. It's anti-creational.
And this force benefits from stories that make us afraid of chaos and crave strict order. That's the key for you, the listener.
So for all of you listening, has this ever happened to you? Have you ever felt drained or confused after someone seemed to perfectly mirror you? Have you noticed beliefs out there that create division and fear rather than understanding and connection?
This is where discernment comes in. You got to be aware of the motivations behind things, the stories that shape how we see the world. Question everything. Question the source, the intent. Figure out what feels true to you deep down.
So here's something to ponder. If this idea of mimicking entities, this duality syndrome, is real, how does it change how you view the beliefs that shape our world? What would it mean for you to move past fear-based beliefs, to stop needing external validation, to connect with that true creative force inside you? That's our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us.